we obviously differ on that, but let me emphasize the importance of the 328 groups, and I've submitted that for the record. You know, Mr. President, we're going to vote in a few minutes, and we're going to vote on a treaty that I regret to say some people are making controversial when, in fact, it really isn't controversial. What this treaty says is very simple. It just says that you can't discriminate against the disabled. It says that other countries have to do what we did 22 years ago when we set the example for the world and passed the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 5 simple words, this treaty says to other countries that don't respect the rights of the disabled, be more like us. That's what we're asking people to do. It doesn't require any changes to American law. 0. This has no tying of the hands of America. There isn't one law in the United States that will be negatively affected, but it will push, it will leverage, it will require other countries, by their commitment, to be held accountable to the standard that we have set and take our gold standard and extend it to the rest of the world. So there are 3 reasons that I've heard that we can't do this. And when I hear them, I'm reminded of what I learned when I was a prosecutor quite a few years ago now. I learned that, you know, if the facts are against you, then argue the law. If the law is against you, then argue the facts. And if both are against you, just make it up. Well, that's exactly what's happening here, Mr. President. Neither the law nor the facts support any argument that has been made on the other side of this treaty. So accordingly, we're facing an entirely fictitious set of arguments on abortion, on homeschooling, on lame duck sessions. All of their arguments have been contradicted by the facts in the law, and let me document that. This treaty is based on the Americans with Disabilities Act. We passed that 20 years ago. In all those 20 years, the father of the act is sitting here, Senator from Iowa. Has any child been separated from a parent because of the ADA? No. Has homeschool been hurt? No. In fact, it's grown and flourishing across the nation. How is it possible that a treaty that, according to our Supreme Court, offers no recourse, no change in American law, no access to American courts, how is it possible that such a treaty could threaten anybody in our country? The answer is simple: it doesn't and it can't. Well, let's go through the arguments one by one. First, they say it would undermine our sovereignty. I've heard several people suggest that. You know, the laws governing the disabled. Well, that's wrong. And Senator Lee just admitted it doesn't affect any law in the United States. All it does is create a committee on the rights of persons with disabilities. What can this committee do? All it can do is review reports and make a suggestion. Are we scared in the United States of America of someone making a suggestion to us about how we might do something? Has no recourse in the court, no legal standing. The Foreign Relations Committee even included language in the resolution of advice and consent to make it crystal clear. So what are we afraid of? That the committee would give us this advice? The second misconception is that this will allow the federal government, acting under UN instructions, to determine what is best for children with disabilities. Again, Mr. President, that is just flat wrong. The treaty does not give the federal government or any state government any new powers with respect to children with disabilities. It doesn't change the balance of power between federal and state government. It doesn't require any change to existing state or federal law. The Justice Department, former Republican Attorney General Dick Thornburgh testified before the Foreign Relations Committee that any assertion to the contrary is incorrect. And our committee even included language in the resolution of advice and consent to absolutely crystallize those limitations. And finally, there are those who argue that a lame duck session is the inappropriate time for senators to consider this treaty. Well, my colleagues, please. Since the 1970s alone, the United States Senate has approved treaties during lame duck sessions a total of 19 times. There's nothing special or different about a lame duck. It's a session of the United States Congress. And just as we are going to consider important fiscal matters, we should consider other important matters. Our constituents expect us to do our jobs. And there's no difference between a lame duck or a dead duck or a regular duck. We ought to be here doing our jobs. More than any of the straw men, though, that we've had to deal with in this debate, there is, in fact, something much bigger at stake here, Mr. President. This treaty and this vote will say a great deal about who we are in the United States Senate and who we are as a country. In the nearly 30 years that I've been here, I think this is the first time I've seen a former majority leader of the United States Senate come to the Senate floor for a vote. And it's certainly the first time that I've seen it happen when he had every right to be at home at age 89, taking care of his health. But that's not Bob Dole. Almost 70 years ago, when he came home to Kansas from the battlefields of Italy in a full body cast, people said that Bob had never had to work another day in his life. That's what they said. He was a hero. He'd made his contribution. But Bob Dole worked every single day to stand and to walk and to use his arms again. He made himself get out of that bed, and he made himself a public servant and a United States Senator and the Republican nominee for president in 1996. But his greatest pride was passing the Americans with Disabilities Act. Bob Dole, why is he here? He's not here because he's here to advocate for the United Nations. And certainly this man who served his country is not here because he doesn't want to defend the sovereignty of the United States of America. He is here because he wants to know that other countries will come to treat the disabled the way we do. He's here because he wants to know that when a disabled American veteran, our wounded warriors, travel overseas, that they're treated with the same dignity and respect that they receive here at home. That's why an 89-year-old veteran, 1 week removed from Bethesda Naval Hospital, comes back to the Senate on an early December day. Because it matters. Because what we do here in the United States Senate matters, not just to us, but to people all across the globe. And maybe some people here need to be reminded of that. This is not about politics. It's not about ideology. It's about people. This treaty helps thousands of vets, men and women, who paid the price of devotion to our country with their limbs, Mr. President. And they struggle every day to get up, button a shirt, get out of bed. And some of them struggle to be able to share in life, as all of us are able to share in it. I met one of them yesterday, Army Afghan vet Dan Brzezinski, a double amputee as a result of the war in Afghanistan. He's fought back, and he's recovered enough to create a small business. And here's what he said, this West Point grad of 2007. He said, and I'm quoting him, "I'm proud to be able to walk using prosthetic legs, yet obstacles that might seem inconsequential to the fully able-bodied, like sidewalk curbs and stairs, take on a whole new meaning for veterans like me who struggle to walk or to use a wheelchair. Very fortunately for me, the United States leads the world in accessibility and equality of opportunity for our disabled. Unfortunately, the advantages we take for granted here at home that allow people like me to live fulfilling, independent lives don't exist in much of the rest of the world." 8 short months after being wounded in combat, and while still a patient at Walter Reed, I joined, and I'm speaking for him, I joined a few friends in a trip to South Africa to watch the World Cup. There I found myself in a different country with no legs, a brand new wheelchair, and a lot of apprehension. And while I should have been enjoying this once-in-a-lifetime trip, I was constantly worried about my ability to get around. Would the restaurant have an accessible bathroom, or would I have to go without it? Would my wheelchair be able to fit in the hotel doorway, or would I need to be carried into the lobby? Those are the kinds of questions we take for granted here in America, but unfortunately, the accessibility measures that we enjoy here simply aren't present in many other countries. That's why Bob Dole and Captain Dan Brzezinski want us to approve this treaty. I've heard nothing from the other side that outweighs the reality of that consideration for persons, not just veterans, all persons with disabilities. What's really at stake here is big. The outcome here will not, despite the fear, it's not going to change one election here in the Senate. It's not going to decide one of the primaries that I fear are distorting the politics of our country. But you know what, Mr. President? It will decide whether some people live or die in another country, where there is no accountability and only United States values and standards are the difference to the prospects of someone with a disability. In some countries, children are disposed of, killed, because they have a disability. Our treaty can actually help prevent that. In some countries, children do not get to go to school and certainly have no prospects of a future simply because they are born with a disability. This treaty will help offer hope where there is none. The United States could actually sit at the table and make the difference for people with disabilities because we're willing to push our values and hold other nations accountable to meet our standards, the gold standard of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mr. President, I'd ask just for another 3 minutes, please.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I've heard some of my Republican colleagues talk many times about making the rest of the world more like America. I hate to think that now, when we have an opportunity to do that, they will retreat from the core conviction and oppose a treaty modeled on the United States example, which has no recourse in American courts and no effect on American law. This treaty isn't about American behavior except to the degree that it influences other countries to be more like us. This treaty is about the behavior of other countries and their willingness to raise their treatment of people with disabilities to our level. It's that simple. This treaty isn't about changing America. It's a treaty to change the world to be more like America. So why join? I've heard my colleagues ask several times, why, if it doesn't have recourse in the law, why join? I'll tell you why, Mr. President. Because we can sit at the table and affect the lives of our citizens by pushing other countries upwards. Because we gain credibility and accelerate change through our advocacy by being part of a process. Because it's good for American business, which can sell products and services as other nations raise their standards and need our expertise to meet their goals, which is why, incidentally, the United States Chamber of Commerce supports this treaty, and a huge number of businesses. Why support it? Because George H.W. Bush started this process, and President George W. Bush signed the treaty to participate in it. And because, in the end, this treaty and our participation in it, and this is the most important, can improve the quality of life for people with disabilities. Because to join it is to keep faith with the men and women who have suffered grievous disability in defense of our nation, and we owe them nothing less. This treaty is not about changing America. It's about America changing the world. But a vote here is a test of this institution. This vote is a test of whether the Senate, which passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, is still capable of voting to change things, let alone send a message that could change the world. I ask colleagues to do for the world what they've done for America. Walk down the aisle here, and for millions everywhere who cannot walk, make a statement. Raise your voice and vote for millions who are voiceless in their own lands. Stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. This is not about the United Nations. This is about common humanity, and this vote is to test whether the Senate will stand up for those who cannot see or hear, and whether senators can hear the truth and see the facts. Please don't let Captain Brzezinski down. Don't let Senator Bob Dole down. Most importantly, don't let the Senate and the country down. Approve this treaty.